Yeah, certainly. So, thank you, Laura. What I would like to do, first of all, is welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. I would first of all like to acknowledge the homelands of the Indigenous peoples of the place we now call Canada and honor the many territorial keepers of the lands on which we work. My name is Tim Rowe. I am a member of the Community-Based Senior Sector Leadership Council. I'm also a co-chair of the Housing Working Group that was responsible for developing the documents that we're going to share with you today and the report that was released in November last year. So what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background before I ask Laura to go through the fact sheets that we are sharing with you today. So today what I want to do is introduce to everybody two fact sheets on making rental housing affordable for people with low incomes. Hopefully these fact sheets will support outreach advocacy to highlight the urgent need for housing for low-income seniors. So that's the whole purpose of this meeting this afternoon. In last year, 2023, the Leadership Council asked the Seniors Housing Working Group to prepare a report on seniors housing and low-income issues in response to concerns about the growing housing crisis, particularly for seniors. To support this work, the United Way was a particular key player, and as a result of the work undertaken by the Working Group and the Leadership Council, a report was released last November, on November the 24th, Aging in Uncertainty, the Growing Housing Crisis for BC Seniors. Hopefully that most people joining us today will have had an opportunity to see this report and review its contents. The report very much highlighted the dramatic crisis facing BC and low-income seniors in relation to the shortage of housing in BC and the issues regarding precarity and homelessness as well. And next slide, Laura. So basically, the Seniors Housing Working Group is a committee of the Community-Based Seniors Housing, Community-Based Senior Services Leadership Council. The council provides advice and guidance to the United Way's BC Healthy Aging Department, which receives significant funding from the Ministry of Health. The council represents membership from across British Columbia involved in not-for-profit and municipal-based senior services sector. The housing group, of which I am co-chair, includes members from both the urban and rural areas of BC and has significant interest and knowledge in relation to housing needs and challenges facing us today. Next slide. So we, as a housing group, continually heard from community members about the urgent need to address housing affordability. Earlier this year, we conducted a survey which identified and priority was the need to look at investment in rent geared to income housing, particularly obviously for low-income seniors, but also for low-income people in other population groups as well. So the housing affordability is an issue that affects many low-income peoples, and we have developed two fact sheets. One of the fact sheets is focused very much on seniors and their needs, and the other is very much based on low-income populations, general populations in the province of British Columbia. Next slide, Laura. I'm now going to pass it on to you to talk a little bit more about the fact sheets.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Tim. My name's Laura Katawaki, and I'm the staff person who supports the Seniors Housing Working Group. And so myself and Marcy Cohen prepared the fact sheets that have been shared with you and that I'll be talking about today. I would like to thank everyone in the Seniors Housing Working Group, as well as other partners who also provided input and helped to shape the information that are in the fact sheets. As Tim has mentioned, we do have two fact sheets. One focused more specifically on seniors and their need for affordable housing, and in particular for a specific type of housing called subsidized rent geared to income housing. And then there's also another fact sheet that more broadly looks at the need for this type of housing for low income populations in British Columbia. And there is a lot of overlap in the fact sheets, and they are very complementary to each other. So I'm going to be providing just some high level highlights from both of the fact sheets. And then I'm going to talk about the policy solutions, which really are the same in both of the fact sheets. And that's because the steps, of course, that we need to take to build more affordable housing for seniors are the same steps that we would need to take for other low income populations as well. All right, so to provide some highlights from the fact sheets. So to start off with, I just want to note that really in the fact sheets, we're focusing on the needs of low-income people for affordable housing. And this would be the bottom 20% or so of income earners. And generally, these people have an income below $43,000 a year. And so most of these people then are only going to be able to afford rents of under $1,100 a month. And in the housing sector, generally housing is considered affordable if you spend 30% or less of your income on it. Now, some of these low income groups then who are potentially going to need rents of under $1,100 a month include, for example, a senior who's reliant solely on government income benefits, and this individual would only be able to afford about $567 on rent a month. A person living with a disability who's on disability assistance, and they would afford a rent of about $445 a month. A single mother with a young child who's relying on income assistance. This person will be able to afford about $422 a month. And then a young adult refugee or another person who's working a minimum wage job. They still would only be able to afford about $905 a month. And I'm sure if you've been looking at the housing market in BC in recent years, you know trying to find a rental unit that's going to cost less than $1,100 a month is extremely challenging. And so that's why we really wanted to highlight this group and their needs. Now, based on data from the 2021 census, it's estimated that for low-income people who fall into this group of having an income below $43,000, there's about 108,820 renter households in this income group that are living in unaffordable, unsuitable, or inadequate housing in BC. And most of these people are living in unaffordable housing. And if you look at this table here, you can see the specific breakdown for certain equity groups. So for example, for seniors, there's 37,865 households who fall into this category and potentially need some sort of affordable housing solution so that their housing can meet their needs. And then you can see examples of other groups in the slide as well. So for example, for Indigenous households, there's about 8,870 households that fall into this category. And then you can look at the numbers for the other households as well. Now, why exactly are there so many people in BC who are living in rental housing that doesn't meet their needs? Well, one of the key factors has been the increasing cost of rents in BC and the fact that there's been a dramatic loss in the number of rental units that rent for less than $1,000 a month. And so it's actually been estimated by BC Nonprofit Housing Association that between 2016 and 2021, there was an estimated loss of about 100,000 homes renting below $1,000 per month. And so that would be a loss of about 20,000 units a year. Now, these units aren't necessarily being destroyed or lost in that way. Some of them are because some are being redeveloped or torn down or that sort of thing. But there's also a lot of these units that because of rising rents, evictions, and other reasons, the landlords are increasing the costs to the extent that they're unaffordable and unattainable for any low-income person. So they're being lost in that way. And since 2021, we found that housing affordability has further eroded, as between 2021 and 2023, the average monthly cost of a one-bedroom apartment has increased by 18% from $1,322 to $1,558. So the 108,000 or so people who need affordable housing solutions based on that previous census data is actually probably higher. And if you think that there might be in 2022 and 2023 an additional loss of about 20,000 affordable units a year based on that BC Nonprofit Housing Association data, it's actually probably closer to 150,000 renter households, 150,000 renter households that actually need affordable housing solutions. And so when we think about these renter households that need affordable housing solutions, one of the key types of solutions that can potentially meet the needs of some of these households is subsidized rent geared to income housing. And this is a specific type of community housing. And so community housing is housing that's provided by the nonprofit and cooperative housing sector in BC. And this type of housing guarantees that a person pays no more than 30% of their income on housing. And so it guarantees that it's going to be affordable. And so then if you consider a low-income person, and if we take the example of a senior, their monthly income, if they're reliant on government income benefits, is only about $1,891. Now, if they're living in this subsidized rent geared to income housing, they spend 30% of their income on housing costs, so that's only $567. And as a result, they have about $1,324 left to pay for all of their other expenses. On the other hand, if we consider this senior, and if you look at scenario 3, if they're living in the average one-bedroom apartment in BC, which costs $1,558, that would mean at the end of the month, they're only going to have $333 to meet their other needs. So that would be very difficult to get by. Now, even if the senior has a rental supplement, such as SAFER, or the Shelter Aid for Elderly Renters benefit, which you can see in scenario 2, that rental subsidy will decrease the cost of the rental housing because you have about a $300 or so subsidy that you would get towards the cost of your housing. But you're still paying for that average one-bedroom apartment $1,231 a month for your housing, and then you still only have about $660 left at the end of the month in order to meet your other needs. So you can see then from this table, the quality of life that this low-income senior has is going to vary quite significantly if they live in subsidized rent-geared-to-income housing, or if they're living and renting in the private market with or without a rental subsidy. And so that's why this type of housing is such a powerful and impactful type of housing for the health and well-being of low-income people, including low-income seniors. And if we consider investing in subsidized rent geared to income housing and other types of community housing, there's a lot of benefits beyond just providing a person with shelter and them having more income to meet their other needs. We do see that there's other benefits as well. So for example, it can improve a person's health and well-being. And there's a lot of evidence that shows, for example, living in unaffordable housing results in higher rates of mortality and suicides. We also see that investing in community housing can be good for government and can actually save money because it's a lot less expensive to pay for operating a subsidized rent geared to income housing unit is less expensive than if that person, for example, were staying in a hospital bed or a homeless shelter bed. We also see that there's benefits to the economy, as having more community housing provides people with places they can live. So then if you're an employer, your workers are going to be able to find housing and be able to come and work for your business. And then finally, we see that community housing can improve educational and childhood outcomes for children and their families, because if a child's living in housing that's poor quality, it's moldy or overcrowded, or if they're continuously having to move, or if they become homeless, there's a lot of research that shows that this significantly impacts their educational outcomes. For example, whether they finish school, whether they go on to higher education, and also other components of their well-being. Now, within BC, we do have about 45,000 or so subsidized rent geared to income housing units that are available through BC Housing funded sources. But this is a far cry from what we need. For example, in Metro Vancouver, the wait list is 18,865 households in 2023 for these units. So there's a lot of people who would like to have this type of housing, but unfortunately do not have access. Now, the provincial government has in recent years increased their investments in this type of housing, and they've done this specifically through two key funds, the Indigenous Housing Fund and the Community Housing Fund, which were both established in 2018 and marked the first major investment by the provincial government in recent years in community housing. So, of course, that was a very positive step. However, if we add together all the new independent subsidized rent geared to income units that have been created through these funds to date or started, that only results in about 11,970 new units for low and moderate income people. Furthermore, if we take the Community Housing Fund as an example, only 20% of the units from this fund are aimed at the very lowest income British Columbians who require deep subsidies and rents of less than $700 per month. So there has been some progress that's being made, but especially for these very lowest income people, it simply is not enough yet. And there's more that we need to do in order to meet their needs. So what can we do then to address the housing affordability needs of low-income people in BC? In the fact sheet, we focus on three key policy solutions. The first focuses on retaining the existing stock of low-income rental housing for people of all ages. Because, of course, the least expensive thing to do is to actually just preserve the housing that we have that is currently affordable, rather than having to build a lot of new housing. And so there's some key actions that we can take in order to further this goal. One of these actions is addressing expiring operating agreements, as currently we do have a number of subsidized rent geared to income housing units already in operation in BC. But a lot of these are older units, and the operating agreements, which are agreements between the federal and provincial government and the housing provider, to provide subsidies for their operations. Unfortunately, a lot of these are expiring, and by 2033, there's about 30,000 units that will have their agreements expired. And the provincial government has agreed to continue its cost sharing, but the federal government has not, and we really need more federal government investments in order to protect these units so that the operators can continue to operate them as subsidized rent geared to income housing. So that's one of the key steps that needs to be taken. There's also a lot of maintenance and repair needs for community housing. A lot of these buildings were built, for example, in the 70s or the 80s, and so they're 50 or so years old. And in that case, they need funding in order to make sure that they're safe and able to continue to exist for the tenants. So that's another key solution. We also need more investment in housing acquisition programs. And in BC, there have been positive steps in this area through, for example, the establishment of the BC Rental Protection Fund, which provides funding for community housing providers to purchase existing rental buildings to ensure that they continue to be affordable for the tenants and aren't moved into the private market at exorbitant prices or redeveloped to be something that people can't afford. So it's been estimated that if we continue to invest in this fund through provincial and federal sources, we can save about 2,000 homes each year over the next 10 years. And then finally, a final policy to help protect the existing affordability is vacancy controls, because we do see that between tenancies, if a tenant leaves the unit and a new one is coming in, during this time, the landlord can increase the price as much as they want for the rent. So in that case, some landlords obviously use that to jack up the price to an unaffordable amount. And if we had vacancy controls in place, they wouldn't be allowed to do this. If we do implement vacancy controls, though, it does need to be done in a thoughtful way in order to make sure that it doesn't have any negative impacts on nonprofit housing providers who sometimes do need to increase the rent by a certain amount in order for the unit to continue to be financially viable. So it would be important that vacancy controls be implemented with consideration and consultation with community housing providers. The second policy solution that we focus on in our fact sheets is building more subsidized rent geared to income housing. Of course, we want to protect what's available, but then we do know what's available in terms of housing currently isn't fully meeting the needs. So in their affordable housing plan, Housing Central, which is a partnership between BC Nonprofit Housing Association, the Aboriginal Housing Management Association, and also the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC, they've put out an affordable housing plan recently, actually just this past Monday. So I would suggest that you have a look at it if you haven't had a chance yet. But in this plan, they recommend that we build 12,000 affordable rental homes each year over the next decade. So that would be a total of 120,000 new affordable rental homes. And this would be for people with incomes of less than $500,000, or sorry, less than $50,000. So this would break down to about 6,600 units for very low and low income individuals who can afford rents of less than $790 a month. And then the remaining units, about 5,400, would be for low and moderate income individuals who require rents of below $1,264 a month. And they do also, in their affordable housing plan, have a specific ask for additional new supportive housing units. And they do also specify, in terms of these 12,000 units, a specific proportion that would be dedicated to Indigenous peoples. So if we were to build 12,000 affordable rental homes for very low and moderate income people each year over the next decade, that would be a really, really positive step, and obviously a lot more than what is currently being done. It would be important, though, to continue to assess and make sure that government is regularly reviewing what the actual housing needs are of low-income people to make sure that the funding they provide is going to be adjusted and will meet any shifting or growing needs and future shortfalls. But this 12,000 rental units a year would be a very positive step. And if we want to build 12,000 new rental units a year, there would be various supports that would be needed for the community housing sector to allow them to do this. First and foremost, of course, we need more direct capital investments and operating subsidies in order to support the development of community housing. There's also the opportunity to make use of free or low-cost public and nonprofit land. This can decrease the costs of building new housing by about 15 to 25%, and it would make it much more affordable for these community housing developers to build new housing if we prioritize this land for low-income groups and equity groups. And then there's also policies at the municipal or provincial level that can be used to decrease construction costs. For example, waiving permitting or development fees for community housing, or taking steps to fast track affordable housing developments. And there's other policy options as well. Finally, the third key area that we focus on as a solution in the fact sheet is to increase the financial assistance for low-income people living in private market rental housing by aligning rental supplements with the market. And so we do recognize that it takes time to build new rental housing. So obviously we're not going to be able to build 100,000 new units over the next year. So there are people who do need immediate relief in terms of their housing affordability issues, and there are some who perhaps just providing a rental supplement will address their affordable housing needs. So in that case, this can be a potential solution to meet some of their needs, though of course the long-term solution and focus needs to be on increasing access to the subsidized rent-geared-to-income housing. Now, currently, there are two main rental supplements that are available from BC Housing, and these are the Shelter Aid for Elderly Renters program, which is for seniors, and then also the Rental Assistance program, which is for families. And these subsidies will provide you a certain amount of money towards your rent on the private market. So, for example, for Safer, the average subsidy is about $200 or so. Now, the main limitation of both of these programs is that the subsidies don't align with the actual rental market costs, and that's because of the rent ceilings that are used to calculate the benefits, which aren't in alignment with the rental market. So, for example, if you take Safer for an example, currently the rent ceiling for Safer is $931, and so that was a recent increase by the provincial government, which is good. But at the same time, if we think about $931, the average one-bedroom apartment in BC costs $1,558. So that means when they're calculating your Safer subsidy, they don't take into account the $627 in rent that you're paying above $931. So they're calculating it as if the rent you were paying was only $931, which clearly it's not. And so as a result, the subsidy that you receive is a modest amount and not really adequate in order to meet your housing affordability needs. So that's a key issue with the current rental supplements. And in order for rental supplements to be a potentially useful, affordable housing solution, we do need to see the rental supplement ceilings be brought in line with what the actual costs are of the rental market. So rental supplements can be one of our tools to address the housing affordability crisis, but just wanting to reiterate that point about it really is not the long-term solution, and we do need to focus as the main solution in investing more in building community housing. So that concludes my summary of the fact sheets. We've shared, of course, the link for the fact sheets in the chat, and you've probably gotten an email about them earlier this morning. So I'd encourage you to read the whole things, as there's a lot more details and facts in them, but that just provides a really high-level overview of what is contained in them. And so now I'll hand it back to Tim.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura, for that presentation. Just move on to the next slide. So the Seniors Housing Working Group was presented the report, introduced the report, as I mentioned earlier, in November last year. It's a very comprehensive, detailed report. with lots of data and evidence to support the need in relation to seniors housing, etc., and identified a number of goals and recommendations. What we heard as a housing group was the fact that we need to take that report and produce a condensed version of the key facts and elements contained in the report. So hence, this is the reason why we're introducing to you today the two fact sheets, which basically extract key points, key goals, key areas of concern that were originally contained in the report that was released last year. So in the meantime, on the release of the report, the housing group has taken some action to make sure that we can distribute it as far and wide as possible. And today's webinar is part of that work that we're undertaking. So currently we have shared the fact sheets through the Healthy Aging Core BC newsletter, which hopefully people have been able to access. And we've also had, we have many connections with organizations throughout the province who are involved with seniors or other population groups that are impacted by rental costs, etc. And we've also had conversations with other partners who are involved in the housing sector, BC Non-Profit Housing Association being one example of those to whom we've had conversations and we have shared the fact sheets with. And then later this year, in November the 6th, the Provincial Summit on Aging, which is being organised by the United Way to be held in Richmond, we will have a section workshop where we will focus very much on the fact sheets and on the advocacy work that we are currently undertaking. Next slide, Laura, please. So one of the key purposes of today's discussions is to encourage everyone to utilize the fact sheets that Laura has just shared with you to start advocating for these urgent needs around low-income housing for seniors and other population groups. And so what we have done as well in relation to sharing this information is we've made contact with local, regional and provincial governments to highlight the needs in these areas and share the fact sheets. We've also connected with other community groups as well to inform them of the fact sheets and their contents and the importance of advocating. Laura and others have done significant number of media releases to raise awareness around the facts regarding low income and seniors housing needs. We've also hosted community meetings as well. Some of our members have taken the report, will be taking the fact sheets out to their respective communities and will be sharing the facts contained and advocating for the need in those areas. And also we will be establishing community networks to advocate for housing, again, using the fact sheets. I'd like at this stage to introduce two members of the Housing Working Group who have great experience in relation to advocacy work. And I'd like to introduce Wendy first of all. Wendy, if you would just share with everyone approaches you've taken in relation to advocacy work that you've undertaken and how this could be applied to utilising the fact sheets that Laura's just shared.
Thank you, Tim. So I'm from Langley Senior Resource Society, and our involvement has been a lot with the community. We have been those fact sheets. We've met with MLAs, the mayors, different community groups, just to make sure that the word is out there and everybody is speaking the same language. I think what was really important is identifying things like it is subsidized rent geared to income. Because a lot of people are talking about rent geared to income. So we really need to specify it's for people who are low income and what we can do to help them. We have also worked with, there was through the Rental Protection Fund, there were 2 buildings that were taken over here in Langley. And the company that took them over, we approached them and talked to them about how can we work with them to sort of keep some suites at a lower rent for seniors And we are very lucky. We just signed a contract last week. So we are going to be getting 5 suites through there at a lower rent than the people on the market would. And with that, we'll supply support to those individuals. We're also doing a lot of work with the media. There's a CBC Vancouver announcement or broadcast going on at the end of this month, hopefully, and where we'll be discussing the concerns. And I'm hoping Laura is also going to be part of that. It's really creating the awareness, and that's what we've been really trying to do, is get the awareness out there and talk about the concerns that it actually is affecting Langley. What we found when I was talking to CBC Vancouver was they didn't think that Langley had a concern and that seniors weren't facing the issues. And I brought awareness to them about the number of seniors who are now living in their car, couch surfing, homeless, because of the fact that their house is being demolished, or somebody, their family's moving in because they can't live somewhere else. And raising that awareness that there are seniors that are now homeless, which is that's a new thing. And it's not something, when I first started here, everybody's like, oh, seniors aren't homeless, but yeah, they are. And it's getting really bad here in Langley. So yeah, it's creating awareness, like you said, increases to the safer and being an advocate for everybody that walks through the door. Our volume has become huge at the Langley Senior Center for seniors that need help. And we are advocating, we're building connections with other community property managers, developers, and so forth to try and get suites for our seniors in their buildings. It's a never-ending battle, and working together, that's how we're going to make a difference.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks. Public awareness is and communication and sharing information is the key elements here. Thanks, Wendy. I'd like now to go to Fort St. John and ask Margaret if you'd like to share with us your experiences in relation to some of the advocacy work you've undertaken over the past, I think you mentioned 25 years, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all the work that has been done behind the scenes, and to the rest of us that are moving forward. Good luck to all of us. We're going to make a big difference in the lives of people. So 25 years ago, we did start us with a very small group, realizing that we needed to do something for the people in our community. And so it grew from there. We became a registered society, nonprofit, so that we could advocate for our community and for the rest of our part of the province. I guess we started small, and we used the people that were there, all had connections in the community, and we built a group called Save Our Northern Seniors, or SONS. And when this group has been going and continues to have an extensive email list, as well as we work with all the politicians in Fort St. John, and any opportunity we can get to present something to the government, we do. In fact, one of the things that I did this year, since there was no select standing committee, I made a select standing committee document and sent it off to the world. And actually, well, not quite, but we had lots of good reviews coming from that. Since we started SONS officially, we have kept track of the number of people who need to have facilities, and we've been basing our focus on mainly people who need a facility like a care home. However, in the last 5 or 6 years, the increase of people that are using our Salvation Army for a food bank, seniors I'm talking about, has really risen. So we need to do something. And this housing report is well done. And I plan on taking it out to as many people as I can via email. And we have a group in Fort St. John that was started during COVID by our mayor, Laurie Ackerman of the day. We started the Fort St. John Seniors Support Network for COVID, and later on we dropped COVID, and And we have representatives on the list of most of our nonprofit groups. So what started as a little kernel has now really grown. And basically what I do is I share information because I get questions from people in the community who have found out about SUNS, and they get the information from somebody else, or they get our Save Our Northern SUNS mini health guide, which has a list of all sorts of information that a senior and anybody else might like to use. I'm really excited that we now have a social connector, Sharon Hammond, in Fort St. John. It's something that a position that is really needed. I feel if we can have more social connectors, it would be wonderful. I'll give you an example. I had a question from a community member. I sent it off to Sharon, and within a day I had all the answers, and I didn't have to do anything except turn around and tell the people. So that's how important a social connector is, helping people in the community. And again, it's that starting small in your community and reaching out to as many people as you can. I will leave my email address. If anybody wants any other ideas, they can email me. It's mckeano35@gmail.com, but I'll put it in the chat. And so thank you to everyone who is in attendance today.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for your sharing your knowledge and experience in this area. That's wonderful. I know from personal situations that the SUNS group in Fort St. John has been extremely successful in the work it has undertaken over the years. So thank you to yourself and all the other people involved in SUNS. I'm going to just call upon Marcy to see, Marcy, do you wish to add anything to this part of the discussion in relation to advocacy experience?
Well, I want to say that one of the things that might be great for people to do is take out just a few of the key facts from the key messages that really connect with you and your community, and reach out to the media just during this time with the election, with housing being one of the key things in the election, and just try to get an interview, or sort of say, I've got this information from these groups I work with, and even give them a few facts, but some way try to get the local media engaged in a discussion with you, because they will be looking for both service providers, but particularly seniors to talk to about this over this election period. And anything you can do to say, I've got people who've had that experience, or who work with people of that experience and know that very intimately what this housing crisis means, they're the ones who the media will likely pick up on. So I think in the short term, it's as much as possible media, and then the information giving to both the MLAs, the local politicians, the community leaders, other community-based service agencies. And over the long term, it's us growing these connections locally to something that's more provincial and that includes more than just seniors. That's our longer term goal for sure.
Thank you, Marcy. Thank you for sharing your experience as well. Just to add to everyone's comments so far, I'd also like to say it's actually having conversations with people. Often people are not aware of the facts that are contained in these sheets, and I think it's important that we have the opportunity to have general conversations to share some of the information to promote awareness in this. There have been many questions, many answers, and lots of information sharing in the chat box. So thank you, everybody, for participating in the chat part. I want to just throw it open for a few minutes now to see if anybody else wishes to add anything in relation to their experiences and how these fact sheets may be used to advocate for more housing for low-income people. Any comments, thoughts, anybody wishes to share?
And maybe while people are thinking up their comments, I'll just answer two quick things that were in the chat. So one was whether this recording will be shared, and we are sharing the recording. It'll be publicly available, and we'll also make sure to resend the fact sheets to you as it's registered participants, so you'll have those in case you've had any trouble accessing the fact sheets. And then one other thing is just, I know that local lens is very important for advocacy. Often we are doing advocacy at a local level. And so there will also be resources that'll be shared with you later that will help you in terms of if you want to bring local statistics to your case. For example, being able to say the specific average rent for Surrey or Langley or Fort Nelson or whatever that might be. So there'll be some local resources that'll also be available to help you find or that have compiled local statistics if you want to be making that local community case.
So Laura, on that particular point, do you want to share the last slide that you just made reference to so that people can see the links that you've identified?
Yeah, sure. Give me a second. So I just want to highlight then some of the local resources that are available. So you may be aware that the provincial government now requires municipalities and regional districts to develop housing needs assessment reports. So within your community, there should have in the last few years been a report that's been developed that talks about current housing needs, estimated future needs, and the needs for specific populations. So I would recommend that you try and Google and find that report for your community, as there'll probably be a lot of useful information in there. There's also a useful tool called the UBC Housing Needs Assessment Tool. And that tool, you can go online and look up different communities across Canada and within BC and look at their estimated need in terms of affordable housing. And so we use that tool for our statistics. If you remember that table I showed you that showed different equity groups who have housing need, we use that table for our data. So you can look up different community data there. There's also the Canadian Rental Housing Index, and there you can look up for your community things like the average rental rate, vacancy rates, and other things like that. Or sorry, that's the CMHC Housing Market Information Portal. The Canadian Rental Housing Index has information on renter profiles. So for example, highlighting different groups like seniors or other equity groups, and then also stats about core housing need. So all of these are really useful sites where you can find local data. I do know that sometimes it can be difficult to navigate these different interfaces. So if you do have any challenges, you can feel free to reach out to me. And I am, as I mentioned, compiling some local resources that'll bring together some of the key information from these different resources so that you can have it in a more accessible way to look up. But if you are interested in exploring these tools, there's a lot of great information in them as well. So that might be something that would be useful for local advocacy.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Quick question, Laura. In the chat box, there's a reference to the Landlord BC member. We haven't, as far as I'm aware, shared this fact sheets with them.
No, we haven't had a chance to reach out to Landlord BC, but that would be a good idea to include them in the conversation as well.
Thank you. So I just one final request. If anybody has any thoughts, ideas they wish to share beyond what we've already discussed, now will be a good opportunity to share them with us. What I would encourage everybody to do now is please utilize the fact sheets that we've provided to you today. Share them far and wide with everybody who you feel needs to be aware of this information. And we will continue with this good work and hopefully have some impact in the near future, particularly during this time when we have elections going on in BC and potentially federally as well. Any final thoughts, comments before we conclude today's meeting?
I believe Jean has her hand up, so we could ask her to unmute if she'd like, and then she can give her comment.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this It's really a lot of great info. I really appreciate that you've done it. I just wanted to make 3 points. One is a lot of people think when you say social housing, they think that's housing for low-income people. But nowadays, most social housing excludes low-income people. And I think one of the most important things we can do is try and get our senior governments to require and fund all social housing buildings to have some low-income units. Our group came up with half have to be low income, at least until we end homelessness. The second point is that I'm with a bunch of other groups like First United. I'm with the Carnegie Housing Project, BCGEU. We're working with Costco and 411 seniors, and we're we have a campaign to get vacancy control, and we're sending out letters to all the parties before the election, and then we want to get together after the election and do something together. And then the third point is the federal government is really missing in action when it comes to subsidizing low-income housing. I think only about 3% of the money that they've spent on the national housing strategy has been housing for people who are homeless. So any pressure or any campaigns that we could build up over the next year, hopefully until there's a federal election, to try and get the feds to actually put money into non-market housing that low-income people can afford would be really important. That's it.
Thank you, Jean, for those very valuable comments, and appreciate that sharing with us. Any other final thoughts before we go? Laura, anything else you wish to highlight at this stage?
Yeah, well, I'll just follow up on what Jean said. I think that point about a lot of the rent geared to income housing isn't necessarily geared towards the lowest income people is a very important point, and one that if you look in the fact sheet that we did for the affordable housing for all low income people, for the Community Housing Fund, 50% of those units are subsidized rent geared to income, but they're aimed at more moderate income people, and the income limits are based on the community that you live in, but in some cases they're going to be as high as, for example, $60,000, $70,000. So that definitely is an important point that we want to emphasize, is that there is any subsidized rent geared to income housing, of course, is good, but we need to make sure that there's units that are reserved specifically for those lowest income people. So thank you very much for bringing up that point.
Thank you, Laura. Any final comments before we leave this webinar today? Well, again, to take this opportunity saying thank you to everybody for joining today's event. I would encourage you to take the 2 fact sheets and utilize them in any way you feel is appropriate. And we thank you again for participating. Have a wonderful afternoon and goodbye.